The blood on her knuckles wasn't from cleaning. Ethan Mercer had seen plenty in his 43 years, cattle drives, bar fights, the brutal honesty of ranch life. But nothing prepared him for the woman who showed up at his door that October morning. Hannah Cole's hands were raw, her eyes hollow, yet she worked like survival itself depended on every scrubbed floorboard. When she refused his offer of lunch, he noticed the way she pocketed the apple from his counter. When she disappeared before dusk, he saw her glance over her shoulder. Not once, but 3 times. Something was hunting her. If you want to know what Ethan found when he followed her into those woods, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The storm had torn through Mercer Ranch like God's own fury, ripping shingles from the main house and turning the old guest cabin into a skeleton of broken windows and collapsed gutters. Ethan stood in the wreckage 3 days after the wind died, boots crunching on glass, and calculated what it would cost to fix versus what it would cost to bulldoze. He was leaning toward the bulldozer. "Mr. Mercer?" The voice came from behind him, so quiet he almost missed it beneath the creak of damaged timber. Ethan turned to find a woman standing at the edge of his driveway, one hand clutching the strap of a canvas bag that had seen better decades, the other shading her eyes against the morning sun. She was thin. Not fashion magazine thin, but the kind of thin that came from missing meals and calling it a choice. Her jeans hung loose at the waist, held up by a belt cinched to its last hole. The flannel shirt she wore had been mended so many times the original color was anyone's guess. But it was her face that stopped him. 30, maybe younger, with cheekbones too sharp and eyes that had learned not to expect kindness. "Can I help you?" Ethan kept his voice neutral, the way you did with spooked animals. "I heard you might need someone." She gestured toward the cabin without quite looking at it. "For cleaning, repair work. I'm good with my hands." Ethan glanced at those hands. The knuckles were scabbed, the nails broken short. One thumb was wrapped in duct tape that had gone gray with age. These weren't the hands of someone looking for pin money. "You heard from who?" "Martha at the feed store. She said you mentioned it yesterday." That tracked. Martha Yates knew everyone's business in a 30-mile radius and considered matchmaking and job placement her sacred duty. Though looking at this woman, at the way she held herself like she was ready to bolt at the first wrong word, Ethan doubted Martha had matchmaking in mind. "What's your name?" "Hannah Coles." "You got experience, Hannah Cole?" "I've cleaned houses, done maintenance work, painted, fixed plumbing." She rattled off the list without pride or shame, just fact. "I'm not afraid of hard work, and I don't steal." The last part she said while meeting his eyes directly, and Ethan recognized the look. It was the same one he'd given his first foreman 20 years ago, when he'd been a kid with nothing but a burned bridge behind him and desperation ahead. It was the look of someone who knew what people assumed and was tired of proving them wrong. "Pays $15 an hour," he said. "Cash, end of each day. You work until the job's done or until you decide it's not worth it." "Fair?" Something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or disbelief that it had been this easy. "Fair." "Cabin needs a full gut. Broken glass cleared, walls scrubbed, anything water damaged torn out. You'll find tools in the main barn, cleaning supplies in the mudroom off the kitchen. Start whenever you're ready." She nodded once, shifted her bag, and walked toward the cabin without another word. Ethan watched her go, noting the way she moved, quick and economical, like someone used to making herself small. When she reached the cabin's porch, she paused just long enough to test the first step before trusting it with her weight. Smart. He told himself to get back to his own work. The south fence line needed attention, and the cattle weren't going to rotate themselves to fresh pasture. But something kept him there, watching through the barn door as Hannah Cole disappeared into the wreckage of his guest cabin. By noon, he'd found 3 excuses to walk past the cabin. The first time, he was supposedly checking the propane tank connections. Hannah was on her knees in the main room, sweeping broken glass into a dustpan with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for defusing bombs. She didn't look up when his shadow fell across the doorway. The second time, he was inspecting storm damage to the exterior walls. Hannah had moved to the kitchen area, scrubbing black mold from the cabinet interiors with a wire brush and a bucket of solution that smelled like it could strip paint. Her shoulders were set in a hard line, muscles working beneath the thin flannel. When he cleared his throat, she flinched, actually flinched, before turning. "Something you need, Mr. Mercer?" "Just checking your progress. You need anything?" "No, sir." The sir bothered him more than it should have. He was only 10 years older than her, maybe 15. "Ethan's fine." "Yes, sir." He'd left before he said something stupid. The third time, he'd given up pretense entirely and brought her lunch. A sandwich from his own kitchen, thick sliced turkey, lettuce, tomato, the good cheese from the farmer's market, and a thermos of coffee. Hannah was in the bathroom, on her back beneath the sink, wrestling with a corroded pipe joint. He could hear her breathing hard, the clank of metal on metal. "Brought you some food," he called from the doorway. The clanking stopped. A moment later, she slid out, face smudged with rust and old grime. Her eyes went to the sandwich like a starving dog that had learned not to beg. "That's kind, but I'm fine." "When's the last time you ate?" "I had breakfast." It was a lie. He could tell by the way she couldn't quite meet his eyes when she said it, by the way her hand had drifted unconsciously toward her hollow stomach before she caught herself. "Humor me," he said, setting the sandwich on the cleanest section of counter he could find. "You pass out from low blood sugar. That's a workers' comp nightmare I don't need." She stared at the sandwich for 3 heartbeats. 4. Then, moving like she expected it to be snatched away, she picked it up and took a bite. Her eyes closed. Just for a second, but long enough that Ethan had to look away from the naked gratitude there. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Least I can do. You're making better progress than I expected. I'll have the main room cleared by tonight. Kitchen by tomorrow if the plumbing cooperates." "No rush, I've got—" But she was already sliding back under the sink, sandwich clamped between her teeth, conversation over. Ethan took the hint and left, but not before noticing that the apple he'd left on the counter that morning, the one from the fruit bowl in his kitchen, was gone. The sun was dropping toward the mountains when Hannah emerged from the cabin. Ethan was in the barn, supposedly organizing tack, but really he was watching the driveway. She'd worked for 8 straight hours, visible through the cabin windows like a ghost moving through the wreckage, never stopping, never slowing. She walked to the barn with that same quick, nervous energy, shoulders already tensing for dismissal or worse. "Finished for the day?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Main room's clear, kitchen's next. I'll be back at 7 tomorrow if that suits." Ethan pulled out his wallet, counted out 8 $20 bills, a full day's work at $15 an hour, plus a little extra, and held them out. Hannah's eyes went wide. "That's too much. You worked hard, earned it. We agreed on 15 an hour, and I'm the boss, so I can pay bonuses if I want." He kept his hand extended. "Take it, Hannah." She did finally, fingers trembling slightly as they closed around the bills. She folded them once, twice, and tucked them into her front pocket with the care of someone handling something precious and fragile. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." "Ethan." "Thank you, Ethan." She turned to go, and that's when he saw it, the glance over her shoulder. Quick, almost furtive, scanning the empty driveway and the tree line beyond like she expected to see something. Someone. "You need a ride somewhere?" The question was out before he'd thought it through. "No, thank you. I've got my own way. It's getting dark. I know these roads." She was already walking, moving faster now, that canvas bag clutched tight. Ethan watched her reach the end of his driveway and turn left onto the county road, heading not toward town but deeper into the rural maze of old logging roads and forgotten properties. He told himself to let it go. She was an employee, nothing more. What she did on her own time was her business. But that look over her shoulder stayed with him through dinner, through his evening routine, through the scotch he poured and didn't drink while sitting on his porch and watching the stars come out over land his family had worked for 3 generations. Something was wrong. The next morning, Hannah arrived at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes early. Ethan knew because he'd been awake since 5, watching the driveway with his coffee going cold in his hand. She approached the cabin with the same quick efficiency, already pulling on work gloves before she reached the door. "Morning," he called from the porch. She startled, actually jumped, before recognition smoothed her features into something carefully neutral. "Morning, Mr. Mercer." "Told you to call me Ethan." Right, Ethan. She said it like she was testing a foreign word. I'll get started. Coffee's on in the main house if you want some. I'm fine, thank you. She disappeared into the cabin. Ethan stayed on his porch, ostensibly reading the market reports on his tablet, but mostly tracking her shadow through the windows. She moved like water, flowing from one task to the next without hesitation. By 9 a.m., she'd torn out 3 water-damaged cabinets and hauled them to his burn pile. By 11, she'd scrubbed the kitchen floor on her hands and knees until the ancient linoleum gleamed. At noon, he brought her another sandwich. This time she accepted it without protest, though she only ate half before wrapping the rest in the napkin and tucking it into her bag. Saving it for later? He asked. Something like that. There's more where that came from. I know, but waste is a sin. The words were automatic, like something learned young and repeated often. Ethan recognized the cadence of scripture even if he couldn't place the specific verse. He'd grown up with a grandmother who quoted the Bible like breathing, and a father who'd considered church a good place to be seen by the right people. He'd left both behind when he'd left home at 17 with nothing but anger and ambition. But Hannah wasn't his grandmother, all righteous certainty and judgment, and she wasn't his father, all performance and polish. She was something else entirely, someone who'd learned hard lessons about scarcity and survival and couldn't quite believe in abundance even when it sat in front of her. You religious? The question came out rougher than he'd intended. Hannah's eyes shuddered. I was raised to be. That's not an answer. No, she agreed. It's not. She went back to work before he could push further, and Ethan had enough sense to recognize a closed door when he saw one. The pattern held for 3 days. Hannah arrived early, worked like she was out running something, accepted his lunch offerings with careful gratitude, and left before sunset with that same furtive glance over her shoulder. Each night, Ethan watched her turn left onto the county road, heading into the maze of old properties where the wealthy kept their vacation cabins and the desperate found places to hide. On the 4th day, he followed her. He wasn't proud of it, wasn't sure he could even justify it beyond the growing certainty that Hannah Cole was in trouble and too proud or too scared to ask for help. But when she left at 5:43 p.m., moving faster than usual, shoulders hunched like she was bracing against a cold wind, Ethan gave her a 30-second head start and then climbed into his truck. He kept his distance, hanging back far enough that his headlights wouldn't give him away in the growing dusk. Hannah moved with purpose, following the county road for 2 miles before turning onto a gravel track that wound up into the foothills. Ethan killed his lights and followed by memory and moonlight, the truck's engine a low growl in the quiet. The track deteriorated into something barely wider than a deer path, branches scraping his mirrors. He was starting to think he'd lost her when he saw it, a flicker of light through the trees, warm and yellow against the blue evening. Ethan parked and went the rest of the way on foot. The cabin, if you could call it that, was a disaster. Smaller than his tool shed, with a roof that sagged in the middle and walls that showed daylight through the gaps. A rusted stovepipe jutted from one side, smoke trickling from its opening. The single window was covered with cardboard and duct tape. And on the porch, silhouetted against that warm yellow light, were children. 4 of them. The oldest couldn't have been more than 8. A girl with Hannah's sharp cheekbones and careful eyes, holding a baby on her hip. 2 boys, maybe 5 and 6, wrestled in the dirt yard with the kind of rough play that spoke of too much energy and too little space. The baby, couldn't have been more than a year old, reached for Hannah as she climbed the porch steps, and the sound the child made, pure joy, pure recognition, hit Ethan like a physical blow. "Mama!" The older girl's voice carried in the still air, high and bright, and so achingly young that Ethan had to brace himself against a tree trunk. "Hi, baby." Hannah's voice was different now, softer, warmer, alive in a way it never was at the ranch. She took the baby, pressed her face into the child's neck, and for a moment just stood there, breathing. "We made dinner," the older girl announced. "Beans and rice, just like you showed me." "You're such a good helper, Sarah." Tommy tried to eat it before it was ready. Did not. One of the boys, Tommy, presumably, stopped wrestling long enough to protest. "Sam's a liar." "Language," Hannah said, but there was no heat in it, just tired affection. "Come on, Let's get inside before the cold sets in. They flowed into the cabin like a school of fish, all movement and noise and life. The door closed behind them, leaving Ethan alone in the darkening woods with a truth that rearranged everything he thought he knew about Hannah Cole. She wasn't running from something. She was running to something, to four someones who needed her more than air. He moved closer, quiet as he could, until he could see through the gaps in the cardboard window covering. The interior was barely better than the exterior. One room, maybe 12 by 12, with a wood stove in the corner and sleeping bags piled against the walls. A camping lantern provided the only light, its battery-powered glow washing everything in harsh white. But the children didn't seem to notice the poverty. They swarmed Hannah like puppies, all talking at once, showing her drawings and telling her stories about their day. She listened to each one, gave each child her full attention, even as she moved through the tiny space with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire, checking the pot of beans, pulling something from her bag, the other half of the sandwich. She tore it into 4 pieces and distributed them with the solemnity of a communion ritual. The children devoured them, and Ethan realized with a sick certainty that this was probably the only protein they'd see today. "Mama, I'm still hungry," the smallest boy said, voice wobbling. "I know, sweetheart. We'll have beans in just a minute, lots of beans. But I want meat, like at school." Sarah, the oldest, shot him a look that was pure maternal warning. "Sam, hush. But I'm hungry." "We're all hungry," Sarah snapped, then immediately looked guilty. "Sorry, Mama. It's okay, baby. We're all tired." Hannah's voice stayed gentle, even as her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Tell you what, tomorrow's Saturday. I'll see if Mr. Mercer has any extra eggs. We can make breakfast for dinner. How's that sound?" The children's faces lit up like she'd promised them Disney World. Eggs. She was promising them eggs, and they looked at her like she'd hung the moon. Ethan backed away before he could see more, before the fury building in his chest could do something stupid like announce himself. He made it back to his truck on autopilot, hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. 4 kids. 4 kids living in a shack that wasn't fit for livestock, eating beans and rice and rationing sandwich halves like treasure. 4 kids whose mother worked herself to the bone for $15 an hour and still couldn't keep them fed. The math was brutal and simple. Hannah was probably clearing, $300 a week after he'd hired her? Even with the bonuses, he'd been sneaking into her pay. $300 to feed, clothe, and shelter 4 children and herself in a cabin that should have been condemned. It was impossible. She was failing, had been failing for God knew how long, and still she showed up every morning with her head up and her hands ready to work. Ethan had been a lot of things in his life: angry, ambitious, occasionally ruthless in business. But he'd never been helpless. And sitting in his truck in the dark, knowing what he knew, feeling what he felt, he'd never been more useless. He couldn't just hand her money. She'd already proven she wouldn't take charity, would work herself to death before accepting a handout. And he couldn't exactly report her to child services. That would probably get the kids taken away, and from the fierce love he'd witnessed, that would destroy her. So what then? What could he do that wouldn't wound her pride but would actually help? The answer came to him as he started the truck. He'd give her more work. The next morning, Ethan was waiting when Hannah arrived at 6:45. She froze when she saw him on the cabin porch, and he saw the flash of fear before she controlled it. "Something wrong?" she asked carefully. "Well, got a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "Cabin's coming along faster than I expected, thanks to you, but I've been thinking the main house could use some attention too. Deep cleaning, organization, that kind of thing. And the stables haven't been properly mucked out in 2 months." He kept his voice casual, like this was just a business transaction. "I could use someone reliable, extra hours if you want them, same pay." Hannah's eyes narrowed, and Ethan could practically see her calculating. More work meant more money, but it also meant more time away from her kids. "How many hours?" "As many as you're willing to give. Could be full-time if you want it. I've got obligations. In the evenings. Work whatever schedule works for you. Just let me know your availability." She studied him for a long moment, and Ethan kept his expression neutral, praying she couldn't see the truth written on his face. Finally, she nodded. "I could do 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Maybe a half-day Saturday if you need it. That'd be perfect. When can you start on the house? Cabin's almost done. Give me 2 more days and I'll switch over. Sounds good. She turned to go, then paused. Mr. Mercer, Ethan, why are you doing this? Doing what? Being kind. The question hit him harder than it should have. Maybe I just need the help. Maybe. She didn't sound convinced, but she didn't push. I'll see you Monday. Ethan watched her walk to the cabin, shoulders a little less tense than yesterday, and allowed himself a small victory. It wasn't enough. Wasn't even close to enough. But it was something. He spent the weekend pretending to work while actually planning. The main house had 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a kitchen bigger than Hannah's entire cabin, and more square footage than any one person needed. The guest wing hadn't been used since his mother died 3 years ago, rooms gathering dust while he rattled around in his master suite like a ghost haunting his own life. There was space here, more space than he knew what to do with. But first he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. Who was Hannah Cole really? Where had she come from? And most importantly, who had put that look in her eyes, the one that said she was always one step ahead of something terrible? Sunday afternoon, he drove into town and found Martha Yates at the feed store, presiding over her domain like a benevolent dictator. Ethan Mercer, she announced when he walked in, twice in 2 weeks. Should I alert the media? Very funny, Martha. What can I do for you, honey? That woman you sent my way. Hannah Cole. What do you know about her? Martha's smile faded. She glanced around the empty store, then gestured for him to follow her to the back office. Once the door was closed, she folded her arms and gave him a look that had withered stronger men than him. Why are you asking? Because she's working for me, and I like to know who's on my property. Bull, you're asking because you're interested. Martha. Don't Martha me. I've known you since you were 17 years old and showed up here with nothing but attitude and a chip on your shoulder big enough to build a house on. I know that look. You're getting involved. Ethan sighed. Just tell me what you know. Martha's expression softened. She pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for him to do the same. Hannah showed up about 6 months ago. Came into the store looking for work. Any work. I sent her to a few places, the diner, the hardware store, a couple of the vacation homes that needed cleaning. She's a good worker, reliable, quiet, doesn't cause trouble. And she's got kids, 4 of them, living out in that old Peterson cabin up in the hills. You know the one, hasn't been occupied since old Bill Peterson died, must be 5 years now. That place should be condemned. Probably, but the property taxes are paid through some trust and no one's gotten around to checking on it. Martha met his eyes. She's doing her best, Ethan, but it's hard raising 4 kids alone. Where's the father? That's the question, isn't it? She doesn't talk about it and I don't push, but I've seen women running before. Hannah's got that look. The confirmation settled in Ethan's gut like lead. She mention any family? Anyone who might help? No one. Near as I can tell, she's completely alone. Martha reached across and patted his hand. Whatever you're thinking of doing, be careful. Women like Hannah, they've learned not to trust easy, especially not men with money who want to help. I'm not trying to... I know, but she doesn't. Not yet. Martha stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Just go slow. And Ethan, don't make promises you can't keep. Those kids don't need another person letting them down. He drove home with Martha's words echoing in his head. Don't make promises you can't keep. But what was he promising exactly? Work? Shelter? Safety? All of it. None of it. He didn't know yet. What he did know was that come Monday morning, Hannah Cole would walk onto his property expecting a simple cleaning job, and he would do everything in his power to give her something more without her realizing what he was doing. It was manipulative, probably paternalistic, definitely crossing some kind of line he couldn't quite define. He did it anyway. Monday, Hannah arrived at 8 sharp and surveyed the main house with the same careful assessment she'd given the cabin. Where do you want me to start? Guest wing, if that works. Second floor, east side. Hasn't been used in years. She nodded and headed upstairs, tool bag in hand. Ethan forced himself to focus on actual work, payroll, feed orders, a call with his accountant about tax implications of the new stock he'd purchased. But his attention kept drifting to the sounds overhead. Footsteps, running water, the occasional scrape of furniture being moved. At noon, he made 2 sandwiches and brought them upstairs. Hannah was in one of the guest bedrooms, windows thrown open despite the October chill, scrubbing years of dust from the windowsills with the same fierce intensity she brought to everything. "Lunch," he announced from the doorway. She turned, face flushed from exertion, and for just a moment she looked young. Not worn down or weary, just young. Maybe even pretty, in a way the hard times hadn't been able to completely erase. "Thank you." She took the offered plate and sat on the edge of the bed, eating with careful precision. This time she didn't save half. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, trying to look casual. "How are the kids?" The question landed like a bomb. Hannah's hands froze mid-bite, her whole body going still and tense. "I don't know what you're talking about. Martha mentioned you had kids. Didn't mean to pry." Hannah set down the sandwich, and Ethan could see her recalculating, trying to figure out how much he knew and what he'd do with the information. "I have 4 children," she said finally, voice carefully neutral. "They're being cared for." "I'm sure they are. Is that going to be a problem for the job?" "Why would it be?" "Some employers don't like complications." "Hannah, I don't care if you have 4 kids or 14. You do good work. That's all that matters to me." She searched his face for the lie, the trap, the hidden cost. When she didn't find it, her shoulders dropped half an inch. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." They ate in silence for a while, the October sunlight streaming through the clean windows and turning the dust motes into tiny galaxies. Finally, Hannah spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why do you live out here alone? Big house like this, all this land? Seems like it should be full of people." Ethan considered deflecting, but something about the directness of her question deserved an honest answer. "It was full of people once. My parents, when they were alive. Hands during busy seasons. My ex-wife for about 3 years." "What happened?" "She wanted a husband who'd be home for dinner. I wanted to build an empire. Turns out those 2 things don't really mix." He shrugged. "Been 10 years now. She remarried, has 2 kids, seems happy. I've got 4,000 acres and more money than I know what to do with. We both got what we wanted, I guess." "Do you ever get lonely?" The question was too perceptive, too close to the bone. Ethan looked away. "Sometimes. But loneliness is better than the alternative." "Which is?" "Disappointing people who count on you." Hannah nodded slowly, like this was a truth she recognized. "Yeah, I know that feeling." They finished lunch without talking, but something had shifted. Some small wall had come down, brick by careful brick. That night, Ethan didn't follow Hannah home. He didn't need to. He knew where she was going, what she was going back to. Knew she'd split whatever dinner she'd managed to scrape together into 5 portions and call it enough. Knew she'd tuck those kids into sleeping bags and tell them stories to keep them warm when the fire burned low. Knew she'd do it all again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until either something broke or something changed. He intended to be the change, but slowly, carefully, without spooking her or crushing the fierce pride that kept her spine straight and her head up. It was going to be a delicate operation, this thing he was planning. One wrong move and she'd bolt, take those kids and disappear, and he'd never find them again. So he'd be patient, he'd be smart, and he'd be ready when the storm came. Because looking at Hannah Cole, at the shadows in her eyes and the scars on her hands, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that a storm was coming. The only question was whether they'd be ready when it arrived. The change started small, so small Hannah almost didn't notice. On Tuesday, Ethan asked if she'd mind organizing his office while he was out checking fence lines. The room was a disaster of old receipts, equipment manuals, and filing that hadn't been touched in years. It would take days to sort through properly. "Take your time," he said, handing her a key to the filing cabinets. "No rush." By Wednesday, she'd created a system that would have made a professional accountant weep with joy. Ethan came back to find every document categorized, labeled, and filed in a way that actually made sense. He stood in the doorway for a full minute, just staring. "You didn't have to do all this." Hannah looked up from where she was wiping down the desk, surprise flickering across her face. "You asked me to organize it." "I meant straighten up a bit. This is..." Hannah, this is incredible. She ducked her head, but he caught the pleased flush on her cheeks. I like things orderly. Makes sense that way. You've got a talent for it. He moved into the room, picking up one of the labeled folders. You ever do bookkeeping professionally? I've kept books before. For a church, a few years back. Her voice went distant. That was a different life. Ethan wanted to ask more, wanted to understand the shadows that crossed her face when she talked about her past. But Martha's warning echoed in his head. Go slow, don't push, so he just nodded. Well, if you ever want to take on more work like this, I could use the help. My accountant keeps threatening to drop me if I don't get better organized. I could do that. In between the cleaning. I'd pay you $20 an hour for the bookkeeping. It's skilled work. Hannah's eyes went wide. That's too much. That's what I'd pay anyone else. You're worth it. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Ethan could see her doing the math, calculating what an extra $5 an hour would mean, what it could buy, who it could feed. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. That night, Ethan made his first deliberate move. He loaded a box with what he told himself were supplies Hannah would need for the office work, pens, legal pads, folders. But buried beneath the office supplies were things that had nothing to do with work. A package of batteries for camping lanterns, a warm fleece blanket, tags still on, a box of protein bars, kids' vitamins. He packed it carefully, casually, like it was all just part of the job. Thursday morning, he left it on the kitchen counter with a note. Supplies for the office. Take whatever you need. E. He watched from the barn as Hannah found it, saw her pull out the pens and folders, nodding to herself. Then she found the blanket. Her hand stilled. She lifted it slowly, running her fingers over the soft fabric, and Ethan saw her shoulders start to shake. She was crying, silently, barely moving, but crying nonetheless. Ethan turned away, giving her the privacy she deserved. When he looked back 5 minutes later, the blanket was gone, packed carefully into her canvas bag along with the batteries and vitamins. The protein bars had disappeared into her coat pockets. She didn't thank him, didn't mention it at all when he came up to the house for lunch. But that afternoon, when she was scrubbing the kitchen floor and thought he wasn't looking, he caught her humming. Just a few bars of some melody he didn't recognize, but it was the first time he'd heard her make any sound that wasn't absolutely necessary. It felt like victory. Friday, Ethan pushed a little further. He accidentally made too much dinner. A whole roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, enough to feed 6 people easily, and brought it to the house right as Hannah was finishing up. My timing's off, he said, gesturing to the spread he'd laid out on the kitchen table. Made way too much. You hungry? Hannah stared at the food like it might disappear if she looked away. I should get home. It'll just go to waste otherwise. I hate eating alone anyway. It was blatant manipulation, and they both knew it. But hunger was a powerful motivator, and after a moment's hesitation, Hannah sat. They ate in silence at first, but food had a way of loosening tongues, and eventually Hannah started talking. Small things at first, observations about the house, questions about the ranch operations, safe topics that didn't venture anywhere personal. Ethan answered, asked his own careful questions, and slowly, piece by piece, began to assemble the puzzle of Hannah Cole. She'd grown up in a small town in Wyoming. Her father had been a pastor, strict and certain about the way the world should work. Her mother had been quiet, obedient, the kind of woman who ironed her husband's shirts and never questioned his authority. I thought that's what love looked like, Hannah said, pushing potatoes around her plate. Total surrender, complete submission. I thought that's what I was supposed to want. And then? And then I met Caleb Ross at a church social when I was 17. He was 25, charming, said all the right things. My father approved. We were married 6 months later. The way she said her ex-husband's name, flat, emotionless, like she was talking about a natural disaster, told Ethan everything he needed to know about how that marriage had ended. The kids? He asked gently. Sarah's 7, Tommy's 6, Sam's 4, and Lily just turned 1. Her voice softened when she talked about them. They're good kids, smart, resilient. They deserve so much better than what I can give them. You're doing your best. My best isn't enough. The words came out bitter. You know what Sam asked me yesterday? If we could have meat for dinner, just once. A 4-year-old shouldn't have to beg for basic nutrition. Ethan's jaw clenched. Where's their father? Hannah's laugh was harsh. Last I heard, Montana, or maybe Idaho. Caleb's not real big on staying put or paying child support. You could take him to court. With what lawyer? What money? And even if I won, you can't garnish wages from someone who works under the table and moves every few months. She met his eyes. I learned a long time ago that some battles aren't worth fighting. Better to just survive. The defeat in her voice made something crack in Ethan's chest, but before he could respond, Hannah was standing clearing her plate. I should go. Kids will be worried. Take the leftovers. Ethan, please. He was already packing the remaining chicken, the potatoes, everything into containers. I meant what I said. It'll just go to waste. She took the containers with shaking hands, and this time she did thank him, voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite hide. After she left, Ethan sat alone in his too big kitchen and made a decision. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. Jim, it's Ethan Mercer. I need you to look into something for me. Quietly. What kind of something? Child support case. Woman named Hannah Cole, ex-husband Caleb Ross. I want to know if there's anything that can be done. Ethan, are you getting involved in... Just look into it, please. Jim sighed. I'll see what I can find, but if this guy's as much of a deadbeat as you're implying, don't get your hopes up. The system's not kind to women in her situation. Then we'll have to be kinder. That weekend, Ethan drove out to the Peterson cabin. Not to spy this time, but to assess. He parked a 1/4 mile away and walked the rest, approaching from an angle where he wouldn't be seen from the windows. In daylight, it looked even worse. The roof was one bad storm away from collapse. The walls had gaps wide enough to stick a hand through. The whole structure listed slightly to the left, like it was too tired to stand up straight anymore. And on the porch, Sarah Cole sat with a book, reading aloud to her younger siblings, while baby Lily napped in a wooden crate that had been lined with what looked like Ethan's fleece blanket. The protein bars sat stacked neatly on an overturned bucket that served as a table. Sarah's voice carried in the morning air, clear and patient, as she sounded out words for Tommy and Sam. She couldn't have been more than 7, but she read with the careful enunciation of someone who'd been teaching herself for years. Ethan stayed hidden, watching this tiny kingdom of resilience, and felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. These kids deserved better. Hannah deserved better. And he had the means to provide it. The question was how to do it without destroying Hannah's pride in the process. Monday morning, he had a plan. Hannah, I need to talk to you about something. She looked up from the bathroom she'd been scrubbing, instantly wary. If this is about Friday, it's about the guest wing. I've been thinking. He'd rehearsed this, made it sound casual. I'm going to start hosting clients here. Business dinners, that kind of thing. Need to make the right impression. Okay? Which means I need someone who can help me entertain. Cooking, serving, making sure everything runs smoothly. It'd be evening work, couple times a month to start. I'd pay you $30 an hour. Hannah's eyes narrowed. $30 an hour to serve dinner? To coordinate the whole event, menu planning, cooking, setup, cleanup. It's a lot of work. You don't have any business dinners scheduled. Not yet, but I will. The lie came easier than it should have. Building a ranch this size requires partnerships. Time I started acting like a professional instead of a hermit. She studied him for a long moment, and Ethan forced himself not to fidget under that sharp gaze. Finally, she nodded. If you're serious, I can do that, but I'd need notice, and I'd need to arrange care for my kids. What if you didn't? Didn't what? Need to arrange care. What if you just brought them here? Hannah went very still. I'm not bringing my children to your home, Mr. Mercer. It's Ethan, and why not? I've got 6 bedrooms sitting empty. They could do homework, watch TV, play in the yard while you work. Hell, I've got a whole library they could raid. He kept his voice reasonable, like this was the most logical thing in the world. Seems easier than finding a sitter. That's not appropriate. Why not? Because... She floundered, searching for reasoning that wouldn't reveal too much. Because they're my responsibility, and this is a workplace. Hannah, Ethan gentled his voice. I know where you live. The color drained from her face. You followed me. I was worried. You're raising 4 kids in a cabin that should be condemned. I'm offering you a chance to bring them somewhere warm and safe while you work. That's not charity. That's logistics. You had no right. You're right, I didn't. I'm sorry. And he was, sort of. Sorry for invading her privacy, but not sorry for what he'd learned. But now that I know, I can't unknow it. And I can't stand by and watch you kill yourself trying to keep those kids fed and warm when I have resources that could help. Hannah's hands had balled into fists. I don't need your pity. Good, because I'm not offering it. I'm offering you work, real work, at fair wages. If your kids happen to be here while you're working, that's just practical. He held her gaze. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm trying to give you options. She turned away, shoulders rigid. For a long moment, the only sound was water dripping from the brush she'd dropped in the sink. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Why do you care? Because someone should. That's not an answer. Ethan considered his words carefully. My father was a mean drunk who thought affection was weakness. My mother was scared of her own shadow. I left home at 17 because staying would have killed me, one way or another. I know what it's like to be alone, to feel like the world's just waiting for you to fail. He paused. I also know what it's like when someone gives you a chance. One person who believes you're worth investing in. That's the difference between surviving and actually living. Hannah turned back slowly. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. And you think you're that person? For me? I think I could be, if you let me. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and fear and a desperate kind of hope neither of them wanted to name. One dinner, Hannah said finally. Trial run. If it doesn't work, we forget this conversation ever happened. Deal. They shook on it, and Ethan felt like he'd just won something more important than any business deal he'd ever closed. The first business dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday. Ethan invited his accountant and the man's wife, people he actually knew and who wouldn't question the sudden formality. He told Hannah to plan for 6, the guests, himself and her. I'm not sitting down to dinner with your guests. Why not? You'll have done all the work. Least you can do is enjoy it. Ethan, bring the kids, let them eat in the kitchen if that makes you more comfortable, but you're eating too. She'd argued, but eventually conceded. Saturday afternoon, Ethan heard the crunch of gravel and looked out to see Hannah's ancient sedan. He hadn't even known she had a car, crawling up his driveway. It was held together by rust and prayer, the passenger door a different color than the rest of the body. 4 car seats were crammed into the back. The children tumbled out like puppies released from a cage, eyes wide as they took in the ranch. Sarah held Lily on her hip, protective and watchful. Tommy and Sam stuck close to Hannah, overwhelmed by the sheer size of everything. Kids, this is Mr. Mercer. Remember your manners. Hi, Mr. Mercer, they chorused, voices small. Just Ethan's fine. And you must be Sarah. He offered his hand to the oldest, treating her with the same respect he'd give an adult. She shook it carefully, clearly unused to being taken seriously. Yes, sir. This is Lily, and that's Tommy and Sam. Nice to meet you all. Your mom's going to be working in the kitchen for a bit. How would you feel about exploring? 4 pairs of eyes looked to Hannah for permission. She hesitated, then nodded. Stay together. Don't touch anything without asking. And listen to Ethan. The boys took off immediately, heading for the barn with the single-minded focus of children who'd been cooped up too long. Sarah followed at a more sedate pace, still carrying Lily, still watchful. Hannah stood in his driveway, wringing her hands. I'm sorry, they're not usually so wild. They're fine. They're kids. Let them run. He gestured toward the house. Come on, I'll show you the kitchen. She followed him inside, and he watched her take in the space. The commercial-grade stove, the double ovens, the walk-in pantry stocked with everything she could possibly need. Her fingers trailed over the marble countertop like it was something precious. This is beautiful. It's functional. My mother liked to cook. She had it redone the year before she died. He pulled out the menu they'd planned together. So, you're in charge. Tell me what you need. For the next 3 hours, Ethan watched Hannah transform. In her own element, confident in her skills, she moved through his kitchen like a dancer. She prepared herb-crusted lamb, roasted vegetables, a salad with homemade vinaigrette, fresh bread baked in the oven, filling the house with warmth and yeast and promise. Every so often, one of the kids would appear in the doorway with a question or a discovery. Sarah found a book in the library and wanted permission to read it. Tommy found a basketball and wanted to know if he could use it. Sam discovered the piano in the living room and was desperate to touch the keys. Hannah answered each interruption with patience, but Ethan could see the strain building. She was trying to work and parent simultaneously, and it was pulling her in too many directions. "Sarah Ishi," he called to the oldest girl, "how would you feel about being in charge of your brothers for a bit? There's a TV in the den, and I've got some movies. You could set them up, make sure they don't destroy anything." Sarah straightened, taking the responsibility seriously. "I can do that." "I know you can. You're good at taking care of them." Something in her young face eased, like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to notice. "Thank you, sir." After the kids were settled, the kitchen grew quiet. Hannah worked, and Ethan pretended to review paperwork at the kitchen table while actually just watching her. She hummed while she cooked, that same melody from before, and slowly the tension in her shoulders unwound. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Sure. Is there really a business dinner tonight?" Ethan looked up from his papers. For a moment he considered lying. Then he decided she deserved the truth. "Yes and no. Jim and his wife are coming. They're real people. But I didn't invite them to talk business. I invited them because I thought you needed a practice run before I start booking actual client dinners." Hannah's hands stilled over the salad she was tossing. "So this whole thing is just an excuse to feed my kids? This whole thing is me giving you a job you're qualified for at wages you've earned. If your kids happen to benefit, that's not charity. That's just logistics." She turned to face him fully. "You're not as smooth as you think you are." "Never claimed to be smooth." "You're manipulative." "Probably. And you've got some kind of savior complex." "Maybe." He stood, closing the distance between them. "But I'm also right. You're good at this. You should be getting paid for it, and those kids deserve to eat more than beans and rice." Hannah's jaw worked, emotions playing across her face too fast to name. Finally, she said, "I don't know whether to thank you or slap you. How about you finish dinner, and we'll see how you feel after?" The ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Deal." Dinner was perfect. Jim and his wife, Margaret, arrived right on time, charmed by Hannah's cooking and warmth. The conversation flowed easily, helped by wine and good food and the comfortable atmosphere Hannah had created. In the kitchen, the kids ate like royalty. Ethan had set them up at the breakfast table with their own portions of everything: lamb, vegetables, bread with real butter. He watched Sam's eyes go wide at the first bite of meat. Watched Tommy eat so fast Hannah had to remind him to breathe. Watched Sarah carefully cut Lily's food into tiny pieces while sneaking extra bites for herself. They were still hungry when they finished. Ethan saw Sarah eyeing the remaining bread with longing she tried to hide. "Sarah," he said quietly, "there's ice cream in the freezer. Chocolate and vanilla. Would you and your brothers like some?" Her face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? Really? Help yourself." Later, after Jim and Margaret had left with promises to return, after the kids had fallen asleep in the den in a pile of blankets and contentment, Hannah found Ethan on the porch. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For tonight. For all of it." She stood beside him, looking out over the dark fields. "Sam asked me if we could live here. Said it's the most beautiful place he's ever seen." "What did you tell him?" "That we have our own home. That this is just for visiting." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that this could be their home if she'd just let it. But he held his tongue. This was her decision to make, her pace to set. "You're welcome here," he said instead. "Any time, for work or otherwise." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she said, "I know." She gathered her sleeping children, loaded them into a rust bucket car, and drove away into the darkness. Ethan watched her taillights disappear and felt the emptiness of his house settle around him like a familiar weight. But something had shifted. Some door had cracked open. The following week, Hannah brought the kids every afternoon after school. She didn't ask permission, just showed up with them in tow and set them up in the library or den while she worked. They did homework at his dining room table, read books from his shelves, played in his yard under Sarah's watchful eye. Ethan found himself adjusting his schedule around them. He'd come in from the fields at 3:30 to find Sam practicing piano scales, or Tommy building elaborate structures out of old ranch equipment manuals, or Sarah reading to Lily in voices that made the baby giggle. He started keeping snacks in the pantry, juice boxes, graham crackers, the good peanut butter. Things appeared and disappeared and no one mentioned it. Hannah noticed, of course, but she'd stopped fighting it. She'd learned to say thank you and move on, accepting help with a grace that spoke of exhaustion and gratitude in equal measure. 2 weeks into the new arrangement, Ethan came home to find Hannah in his kitchen, crying. Not the silent tears he'd seen before. This was ugly crying, the kind that came from somewhere deep and broken. She had her phone clutched in one hand, the other pressed against her mouth like she could physically hold in the sobs. "Hannah?" He crossed to her immediately. "What happened?" She showed him the phone. A text message from a number she hadn't saved. "Found you. I'm coming for what's mine." It was signed with just a name, Caleb. And just like that, the storm Ethan had been waiting for announced its arrival. Ethan's blood ran cold as he read the message again. The words were simple, but the threat behind them was unmistakable. "When did you get this?" His voice came out harder than he intended. Hannah wiped at her face with shaking hands. 20 minutes ago. I've been trying to figure out what to do." "You call the police. That's what you do. And tell them what? That my ex-husband sent me a text message?" Her laugh was brittle. "They'll say it's a civil matter, that unless he actually does something, there's nothing they can do." "He's threatening you." "He's saying he wants to see his kids. That's not illegal, Ethan. We were never officially divorced. I just left." She pressed her palms against her eyes. "I thought I'd covered my tracks. Thought I'd finally gotten far enough away that he wouldn't find me." "How did he find you?" "I don't know. Maybe someone from back home saw me. Maybe he's been looking this whole time." Her voice cracked. "It doesn't matter how. He found us. And now he's coming." Ethan's mind raced through options, discarding them as fast as they appeared. Restraining order, too slow. And Hannah said they weren't divorced. Police protection, not without a concrete threat. Running. Where would she go with 4 kids and no money? "Stay here," he said. Hannah looked up at him like he'd lost his mind. "What?" "Tonight. Stay here. You and the kids. If he shows up at that cabin and you're not there, that buys us time to figure this out." "Ethan, I can't just move into your house. Why not? You're already here half the time anyway. And if Caleb's serious about coming for you, I'd rather you be somewhere safe. Somewhere with locks on the doors and a man who knows how to use a shotgun if necessary." The mention of the shotgun made Hannah flinch, but she didn't argue. That more than anything told Ethan how scared she really was. "Just for tonight," she said finally, "until I figure out what to do. As many nights as you need. They collected the kids from the den, where they'd fallen asleep watching a nature documentary. Sarah woke when Hannah touched her shoulder, instantly alert in the way of children who'd learned to sleep light. "Mama, what's wrong?" "Nothing, baby. We're just going to stay here tonight. Mr. Mercer has extra rooms." Sarah's eyes found Ethan's, sharp and assessing despite her age. She knew something was wrong. Kids always knew. "Is he coming?" she asked quietly. Hannah's face went pale. "Sarah, I'm not stupid, Mama. Is Daddy coming?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Tommy and Sam stirred at the word Daddy, their small faces shuddering with an instinctive fear that made Ethan's hands curl into fists. "I don't know," Hannah said, voice breaking, "but we're safe here. Ethan's going to make sure we're safe." It was a promise Ethan hadn't explicitly made, but he made it now with a single nod. Sarah held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded back. Some understanding passed between them. An alliance formed in the space where words weren't needed. He set them up in the guest wing. 3 bedrooms clustered together, close enough that Hannah could hear if any of the kids called out. He brought fresh linens, towels, extra blankets, found a pack and play in the attic for Lily, left over from when his sister used to visit with her kids. "There's food in the kitchen," he told Hannah as she tucked Sam into bed. Help yourself to anything. Doors are locked, alarms set, and I'm right down the hall if you need me. Ethan? She caught his arm as he turned to leave. Thank you for all of this. I know I keep saying it, but you don't have to thank me for basic human decency. In my experience, decency hasn't been all that basic. The sadness in her voice nearly undid him. He wanted to pull her into his arms, promise her that everything would be okay, that he'd protect her and those kids from whatever was coming. But that felt like crossing a line they hadn't approached yet, so he just squeezed her hand. Get some sleep. We'll figure this out in the morning. He didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in his office with a glass of scotch he didn't drink and his phone in his hand, calling in favors from people who owed him. First was Jim, his lawyer, who answered on the third ring despite the late hour. This better be good, Ethan. I need everything you can find on Caleb Ross, criminal record, employment history, last known address, everything. The deadbeat ex? What's happened? He's found Hannah. Sent her a threatening text. I need to know what we're dealing with. Jim was quiet for a moment. You know, I have to ask, how involved are you in this situation? Involved enough. Can you help me or not? I can help. Give me until morning. And Ethan, if this guy's dangerous, you need to involve the police. I will. Just get me the information first. The second call went to his ranch foreman, Miguel, who'd worked for him for 15 years and knew how to keep his mouth shut. Miguel, I need you to keep an eye out over the next few days. Man might come around asking questions about Hannah Cole. Average height, dark hair. I'll send you a photo if I can get one. If you see him, you call me immediately. Don't engage. Something I should know about, boss. Just being cautious. Hannah's got some trouble from her past that might be catching up. I want to make sure she and her kids stay safe. Understood. I'll spread the word to the other hands. We'll keep watch. The third call was the hardest. He dialed his sister Rebecca in California, woke her up despite the time difference. Ethan? What's wrong? I need advice. Hypothetically, if someone was trying to protect a woman and her kids from an abusive ex, what would be the smartest legal approach? Hypothetically? Rebecca's voice sharpened. She was a family law attorney, one of the best in her state. Or are we talking about something real? Real. A woman who works for me. Her ex-husband just made contact after months of nothing. She's scared, Beck, and I don't know how to help her without making things worse. Rebecca launched into lawyer mode, firing questions faster than he could answer. Were they legally divorced? No. Was there a custody agreement? No. Had there been documented abuse? Not officially. Had the father been involved with the kids? Not for over a year. Okay, she said finally. Here's the situation. Without a divorce decree or custody agreement, both parents have equal rights to those children. If he shows up and demands to take them, legally, he can. Ethan's stomach dropped. That's insane. That's family law. The good news is there are steps she can take. File for divorce, file for sole custody, request a protection order. But all of that takes time and money, and in the meantime, she's vulnerable. So what do? You document everything, every text, every call, every interaction. You help her find a lawyer who will work with her financial situation. And you make sure she's somewhere safe until the legal system catches up with reality. She's staying at my place. Rebecca made a small sound of understanding. You're in deep, aren't you? I'm helping someone who needs it. Ethan, baby brother, I love you, but be careful. Men like this ex-husband, they don't like losing control. And if he thinks you're taking what he considers his, things could get ugly fast. Let them get ugly. I'm not backing down. I know you're not. That's what worries me. She sighed. Send me her information. I'll make some calls, see if I can find her a good family lawyer in your area who might do pro bono work. But promise me you'll be smart about this. I promise. After he hung up, Ethan sat in the dark and let himself feel the weight of what he'd taken on. This wasn't just offering Hannah a job or a place to stay. This was inserting himself between her and a man who'd already proven he was willing to hurt her. This was potentially putting himself and his ranch in the crosshairs of someone desperate and violent. He should have been scared, should have been second-guessing every decision that led him to this point. Instead, he felt calm, certain, ready. Down the hall, he heard footsteps. Light, careful, trying not to wake anyone. He found Hannah in the kitchen, staring out the window into the darkness. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. She jumped, hand flying to her chest. "You scared me." "Sorry. Want some company?" She nodded, and they stood together in the quiet kitchen, two people on the edge of something neither of them fully understood yet. "I keep waiting for him to appear," Hannah said finally. "Every shadow, every sound. I know it's irrational. He can't have gotten here that fast, but I can't shake the feeling that he's already out there, watching. He's not. And even if he was, he'd have to go through me to get to you. That's what I'm afraid of." She turned to face him. "You don't know Caleb. Don't know what he's capable of when he's angry. Tell me." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself. "It started small. Criticism. Control. He decided what I wore, who I talked to, where I went. Said it was because he loved me, because he wanted to protect me from a sinful world." Her voice went flat, reciting facts. "Then it got worse, yelling, throwing things, holes in walls. He never hit me where it would show. Always the stomach, the ribs, places I could cover up." Ethan's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached, but he stayed silent, letting her talk. "I stayed because I thought I had to, because my father said divorce was a sin, because Caleb said no one else would want a woman with 4 kids, because I was scared." She met Ethan's eyes. "And then one day, he grabbed Sarah. She was 5, had talked back to him about something small. He grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, and I saw my whole future in that moment. Saw my daughter learning to accept violence as love. Saw my sons learning that this was how men treated women. So you left." "So I left. Took the kids in the middle of the night while he was passed out drunk. Drove until the car almost died, found that cabin, and started over." Her hands were shaking. "I've spent every day since then looking over my shoulder, waiting for this moment. And now it's here." Ethan moved closer, slowly, giving her space to retreat if she needed it. "He's not taking you back. Not taking the kids. I don't care what the law says. I've got resources, connections, money. We'll fight this properly." "Why?" The question came out anguished. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me." "I know enough. Know you're a good mother. Know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. Know those kids adore you and you die before you let anything happen to them." He paused. "And I know what it's like to feel alone. To think the world's against you and there's no point in asking for help because no one's coming." "And you think you're coming? For me?" "I'm already here." Hannah stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then, moving like she was afraid he'd vanish if she moved too fast, she stepped forward and pressed her face against his chest. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried out months of fear and exhaustion. They stood like that until the sky started to lighten, neither one willing to break the moment. Finally, Hannah pulled back, wiping at her face. "I should check on the kids." "Hannah, thank you for listening, for everything." She managed a watery smile. "I'm glad I don't have to do this alone anymore." Morning came with Jim's call. Ethan answered on the first ring, stepping out onto the porch so he wouldn't wake anyone. "What did you find?" "Caleb Ross, age 33, 2 arrests for assault, 1 conviction that got pleaded down to disturbing the peace, multiple complaints from former employers about erratic behavior, currently wanted in Montana for failure to pay child support." "Wanted as in there's a warrant?" "Bench warrant, yeah. It's not high priority. Family court stuff usually isn't, but it exists." Jim paused. "Ethan, this guy's bad news. He's got a pattern. Gets work, gets fired, moves on, leaves destruction in his wake. If he's decided he wants those kids back, it's not because he loves them." "Then why?" "Could be a dozen reasons. Control? Revenge? Heard Hannah's got something worth taking. Or maybe he needs them for something. Welfare benefits, tax purposes, who knows? Point is, whatever his motivation, it's not about being a father." Ethan's hands tightened on the porch railing. "What are our options?" "Hannah needs to file for divorce immediately and request emergency custody. With his criminal record and the warrant, we've got a decent shot at getting her temporary sole custody while the divorce proceeds. But she needs to do it fast before he can file anything himself." "Can we do it today?" I can have the paperwork ready by noon, but Ethan, she needs to be the one to sign it. This has to be her choice. I know, I'll talk to her. He found Hannah in the kitchen making breakfast for the kids. Sarah was helping, cracking eggs into a bowl with careful concentration, while Tommy set the table and Sam entertained Lily. It was so domestic, so normal, that for a moment Ethan could almost forget the storm gathering on the horizon. Hannah, can we talk? In private? She glanced at Sarah. Baby, can you watch your brothers for a few minutes? Yes, Mama. They stepped into Ethan's office, and he closed the door. Hannah listened quietly while he explained what Jim had found, what needed to happen next. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. If I file for divorce, he'll know exactly where I am. He already knows. The text proves that. Filing makes it real, makes it a fight. Hannah, it's already a fight. Has been since you left. You've just been fighting it alone. Ethan leaned against his desk. This way, you've got the law on your side. You've got documentation. You've got a chance to protect those kids legally instead of just running. And what happens if the judge sides with him? If they decide he deserves joint custody? Then we appeal, we fight, we do whatever it takes. He met her eyes. But at least we're fighting smart instead of scared. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, so small and fragile in his big office. I'm so tired of being scared. I know. And if I do this, if I file, there's no going back. No, there's only going forward. She nodded slowly. Okay, let's do it. They spent the morning preparing. Jim came to the ranch personally, bringing a stack of documents that needed Hannah's signature. Divorce petition, request for emergency custody, application for a protection order. Each signature felt like a declaration of war. This gets filed today, Jim explained. Caleb will be served within 72 hours. Once he receives the papers, he has 30 days to respond. And if he shows up before then? Hannah asked. Then you call the police and you call me. With these filings on record, any attempt to take the children becomes a potential kidnapping charge. Jim softened his voice. You're doing the right thing, Hannah. She didn't look convinced, but she signed the last document and handed it back. After Jim left, the house fell into an uneasy quiet. The kids sensed the tension, going subdued and clingy. Hannah tried to maintain normalcy, but Ethan could see the way her hands shook when she thought no one was looking, the way she startled at every sound. He wanted to promise her everything would be okay, but he'd never believed in empty promises. So instead he stayed close, a solid presence in the background while Hannah tried to hold herself together. The call came 2 days later. Ethan was in the barn when his phone rang, an unknown number that he answered anyway. Mercer. This the guy who's been fucking my wife? The voice was rough, aggressive, everything Ethan had expected and worse. He forced himself to stay calm. This is Ethan Mercer. Who's this? You know who this is. Where's Hannah? If you're Caleb Ross, then you should know that Hannah has filed for divorce and sole custody. Any communication needs to go through her lawyer. I don't give a damn about lawyers. I want to see my kids. That's not my decision to make. The hell it isn't. You're the one keeping them from me. You think I don't know what's going on? Think I don't know you've been sniffing around my family? Ethan's temper flared. Your family. You abandoned them, left them to starve while you ran off to Montana. Who the hell do you think you are? Some rich asshole who thinks he can buy whatever he wants? Caleb's voice rose. Those are my kids, my wife, and I'm coming to get what's mine. They're not property, Caleb. They're people, and they don't want anything to do with you. Then I'll make them want it. I've got rights. The law says those kids are half mine. The law also says you owe thousands in child support. There's a warrant out for you in Montana. You really want to push this? The silence on the other end was dangerous. When Caleb spoke again, his voice was low and controlled in a way that was somehow worse than the yelling. You don't know who you're messing with, Mercer. You think your money protects you, your big ranch? I've taken down bigger men than you, and when I'm done, you're going to wish you'd never heard the name Hannah Cole. The line went dead. Ethan immediately called Jim, then the sheriff's office, reporting the threat. But he knew, deep in his gut, that documentation wouldn't be enough. Caleb Ross was coming, and when he arrived, words on paper wouldn't stop him. He found Hannah in the kitchen, teaching Sarah how to make bread. The domesticity of the scene, flour on their noses, Lily banging a wooden spoon on the floor, the smell of yeast and warmth made what he had to tell her even harder. "Hannah," Caleb called. Her hands froze mid-need. "What did he say?" Ethan told her, editing out the worst of the threats but keeping enough that she'd understand the danger. Sarah listened from her position at the counter, face carefully blank in that way that meant she was absorbing every word. "He's going to come here," Hannah said. Hannah, it wasn't a question. "Probably." "When?" "I don't know, but we'll be ready." That night, Ethan taught Hannah how to use the shotgun he kept in his office. She was a surprisingly good shot, steady-handed and focused once she got over her initial fear of the weapon. "I never thought I'd be the kind of person who needed to know this," she said, lowering the gun after hitting 3 clay pigeons in a row. "You're the kind of person who does whatever it takes to protect her kids. If that means learning to shoot, then you learn to shoot." They practiced until dark, until Hannah could load, aim, and fire without hesitation. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small piece of control in a situation where she'd had none. Caleb showed up 3 days later. Ethan was in the south pasture when Miguel called, voice tight with tension. "Boss, we got a problem. There's a guy at the main gate demanding to see Hannah. Says he's her husband. He's drunk, aggressive, and he's got a tire iron. Keep him at the gate. I'm on my way. And Miguel, call the sheriff." Ethan drove faster than he should have, truck kicking up dust on the ranch roads. He called Hannah as he drove. "Lock the doors, take the kids to the master bedroom. It's got a reinforced door and its own phone line. Do not come out until I tell you it's safe." "Ethan, please, Hannah, trust me." He heard her gathering the kids, her voice calm even as she hurried them along. "Okay, we're moving now. Be careful." "Always am." The lie tasted bitter. Caleb Ross was exactly what Ethan expected. Average height, wiry build, eyes red-rimmed from drinking and driving. He paced in front of the gate like a caged animal, tire iron swinging loosely in one hand. Miguel and 2 other ranch hands stood between Caleb and the property, their posture casual but ready. They'd been in enough bar fights to know how this could go. "You Mercer?" Caleb called when Ethan's truck pulled up. "I am." "Then open this gate and let me see my family." "Can't do that, Caleb." "The hell you can't." Caleb slammed the tire iron against the gate, the clang echoing across the fields. "Those are my kids in there, my wife. You got no right keeping them from me." "Hannah's filed for divorce. You've been served. You know the rules." "I don't give a damn about your rules." Caleb's face was flushed, veins standing out on his neck. "You think you're some kind of hero, saving the poor, helpless woman? She'd tell you about herself, about what she really is?" "I know everything I need to know." "You don't know shit. Hannah's a liar, a thief. She stole my kids, stole money, stole my life." He pointed the tire iron at Ethan. "And now she's got you wrapped around her finger, probably spreading her legs to keep a roof over her head." The rage that flooded through Ethan was white-hot and dangerous. He saw Miguel tense, ready to intervene if Ethan did something stupid. "You need to leave," Ethan said, voice deadly calm. "The sheriff's on his way. You've got a warrant in Montana. You really want to add trespassing and assault to your problems?" "I'm not trespassing. I'm collecting what's mine." "They were never yours. You lost them the first time you raised your hand to Hannah." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "She's been talking, huh? Playing the victim? That's what she does. Gets people to feel sorry for her so she doesn't have to take responsibility for her own failures. The only failure here is you. As a husband, as a father, as a man." Caleb rushed the gate, slamming into it with his shoulder. The metal held, but barely. Miguel and the hands moved forward, ready to restrain him if necessary. "I'll kill you," Caleb screamed. "You hear me? I'll burn this whole place down before I let you keep them." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Caleb heard them too, backing away from the gate with wild eyes. "This isn't over, Mercer. You tell Hannah I'm not going anywhere. Those kids are mine, and I'm taking them back. One way or another." He ran for his truck, a beat-up Ford with Montana plates, and peeled out, gravel spraying. The sheriff's car arrived 30 seconds later, but by then Caleb was gone, disappearing down the county road like a ghost. Sheriff Morrison took Ethan's statement, made notes about the threats, promised to put out a bolo for Caleb's truck, but they all knew how these things went. Unless Caleb actually did something, there was only so much the law could do. "You've got good security here," Morrison said, gesturing to the gate and fencing. "Keep it locked. Keep your eyes open. And Ethan, if he comes back, you call us first. Don't try to be a hero." "Wouldn't dream of it, Sheriff." After Morrison left, Ethan went to find Hannah. She was still in the master bedroom, kids clustered around her on the bed. Sarah held the phone in one hand, ready to call 911 if needed. Tommy and Sam pressed against Hannah's sides. Lily slept in her arms, oblivious to the danger. "Is he gone?" Hannah asked. "For now." She nodded, but didn't move. Couldn't move, maybe. Frozen by fear and adrenaline. "He's not going to stop," she whispered. "You heard what he said. He'll burn it all down before he lets us go." "Then we make sure there's nothing left to burn." The words were brave, but privately, Ethan wondered if he'd just made everything worse, if inviting Hannah and her kids into his life had painted a target on all of them. But when Sarah looked at him with those two old eyes and said, "Thank you for protecting us, Ethan," he knew he'd make the same choice 100 times over, even if it meant going to war. The war came in stages, each one more calculated than the last. Caleb didn't return to the ranch that night, or the next, but his presence lingered like smoke, poisoning the fragile sense of safety they'd built. Hannah jumped at shadows. The kids grew quieter, more watchful. Even Lily seemed to sense the tension, fussing more than usual, reaching for her mother with desperate little hands. Ethan upgraded the security. New cameras at every entrance, motion sensors on the perimeter, a direct line to the sheriff's office. Miguel and the ranch hands took turns doing night patrols, circling the property with rifles slung over their shoulders and radios crackling in the darkness. It felt like preparing for a siege, because that's exactly what it was. The first legal volley came 5 days after Caleb's appearance at the gate. A courier arrived with documents. Caleb's response to Hannah's divorce petition. Jim brought them to the ranch personally, his expression grim. "He's filed for joint custody," Jim said, spreading the papers across Ethan's dining room table. Claims Hannah abandoned the marital home, engaged in parental alienation, and is living in an inappropriate situation with a man she's not married to. Hannah's face went white. "He's twisting everything." "That's what abusers do. They rewrite history to make themselves the victim." Jim pulled out another document. "He's also requesting the court order you to return to Montana for the custody hearing. Says that's where the marriage took place, where the kids were born, so that's where jurisdiction lies." "Can they make me go back?" The fear in Hannah's voice was palpable. "Technically, yes, but we can fight it. File a motion to transfer jurisdiction here. Argue that Montana hasn't been your residence for over a year, that the children are established here with school and medical care." Jim looked at Ethan. "The problem is, none of that's true yet. The kids aren't in school here. They don't have medical records here. As far as the court's concerned, they're transient." Ethan's mind raced. "Then we fix that today." Within an hour, he had Sarah, Tommy, and Sam enrolled in the local elementary school. By afternoon, they had appointments with a pediatrician in town for wellness checkups and to establish care. By evening, Hannah had a Montana driver's license application in progress to change her address to the ranch. "This is happening too fast," Hannah protested as Ethan drove them back from the county clerk's office. "You're reorganizing your entire life for us." "I'm establishing a paper trail that shows those kids are residents of this county, with this state's jurisdiction. That's strategy, not charity." "It's still too much," Sarah spoke up from the back seat, voice quiet but firm. "Mama, let him help, please." Hannah turned to look at her daughter, and something passed between them, an understanding that children of chaos developed young, the knowledge that sometimes survival meant accepting help, even when pride screamed to refuse it. "Okay," Hannah whispered. "Okay." The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Jim worked 18-hour days building their case, interviewing witnesses, gathering evidence. He found Hannah's old neighbors in Montana who'd heard the fights, seen the bruises she tried to hide. He documented Caleb's employment history, the pattern of jobs lost to drinking and violence. He pulled school records showing the kids had missed weeks of education during the worst periods of the marriage. But Caleb had his own lawyer now, a slick operator out of Billings who specialized in fathers' rights cases. And he was building a narrative that was disturbingly effective. Hannah as an unstable woman who'd kidnapped his children and shacked up with a rich rancher, living off Ethan's money while keeping a father from his kids. "They're going to make me look like a gold digger," Hannah said one night, staring at the opposition's brief. "Like I seduced you for your money. Let them try. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you knows that's garbage. You don't understand how this works. I've seen it before in my father's church. Women who left bad marriages, who tried to protect their kids. The community rallied around the husbands, painted the wives as hysterical, ungrateful, rebellious." Her hands shook. The truth didn't matter, just the story people wanted to believe. Ethan took the brief from her hands and set it aside. "Then we make sure our story is louder, more convincing, backed by evidence instead of manipulation. And if it's not enough, then we appeal. We fight at every level until we win. You keep saying we like this is your fight too." Ethan met her eyes. "It is my fight. Has been since the moment I decided to care about what happened to you and those kids." Hannah looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she did something that surprised them both. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief, tentative, more question than answer. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize." Ethan's voice came out rougher than intended. "But Hannah, you need to know that's not why I'm doing this. I don't have expectations. I'm not keeping score. I know. That's why I wanted to." She stood, gathering the scattered papers. "I should check on the kids." She left before he could respond, and Ethan sat alone in the quiet house, feeling like something fundamental had shifted beneath his feet. The days before the hearing blurred together. Hannah practiced her testimony until she could recite it without shaking. The kids started school, and Ethan watched them transform in small ways. Tommy's shoulders straightening with pride when he brought home a gold star, Sam making a friend who invited him to play at recess, Sarah joining the school library club and coming home with stacks of books. Even Lily thrived, babbling more, taking her first wobbly steps across Ethan's living room while everyone cheered. These were normal things, everyday miracles that shouldn't have felt revolutionary. But for kids who'd spent a year living in survival mode, normalcy was its own kind of magic. Ethan found himself woven into their routines without quite knowing how it happened. He helped with homework at the kitchen table, his rusty math skills barely keeping pace with third-grade multiplication. He learned to braid Sarah's hair in the mornings, fingers clumsy at first but improving with practice. He discovered that Sam had nightmares and would sometimes appear at his bedroom door in the small hours, asking in a whisper if he could sleep on Ethan's floor. The first time it happened, Ethan had been baffled. The second time, he'd put extra blankets on the floor and let the kid curl up like a puppy at the foot of the bed. By the fifth time, he didn't even wake fully, just listened for the soft patter of feet and the rustle of Sam settling in. "You're good with them," Hannah observed one morning, watching Ethan flip pancakes while simultaneously adjudicating a dispute between Tommy and Sam about whose turn it was to feed the barn cats. "I'm winging it, mostly." "You're doing better than winging it. They trust you. That's not something they give easily." Ethan plated the pancakes and handed them to the kids. "They're good kids, easy to care about." Their father never thought so. He saw them as obligations, burdens, evidence of my failure to use birth control properly. "Oh," Hannah's voice went distant. "He used to say that if I just kept my legs closed, he wouldn't be stuck supporting a bunch of brats." The casual cruelty of it made Ethan's blood boil, but he kept his voice level. "Then he's an idiot who doesn't deserve them." "No, he doesn't." Hannah moved to the coffee pot, pouring herself a cup. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never met him, if I'd made different choices. You'd have different kids, and the world would be poorer for it." She smiled, small and genuine. "That's a nice way to look at it." 2 days before the hearing, Caleb made his second appearance. This time he was smarter about it. He didn't come to the ranch. Instead, he showed up at the elementary school 20 minutes before dismissal, standing on the public sidewalk with a sign that read, "A Father's Rights Matter," and a stack of flyers featuring photos of the kids from years ago, back when they'd still lived with him. The school called Hannah immediately. She called Ethan. They both arrived to find a scene that was somehow worse for its civility. Caleb stood on that sidewalk, perfectly within his legal rights, handing flyers to confused parents and telling anyone who'd listen about how his ex-wife had kidnapped his children and was being sheltered by a rich rancher who thought money could buy anything. "There they are," Caleb called out when Hannah and Ethan pulled up. "The woman who stole my kids and the man who's helping her do it." Parents stared, whispered. Some looked sympathetic to Caleb, others suspicious. A few recognized Hannah from school pickup and looked uncomfortable, caught between competing narratives. Hannah's face was white but composed as she walked toward the school entrance. Ethan stayed close, positioning himself between her and Caleb. "Hannah, baby, don't do this," Caleb called, voice dripping with false sincerity. "Those kids need their father. You know they do. Whatever problems we had, we can work through them. For the children's sake." Hannah didn't respond, didn't even look at him. But Ethan saw the way her hands clenched, knuckles white. "I've changed," Caleb continued, playing to the crowd now. "I've been sober 6 months, got a job, got my life together. All I want is a chance to be a dad to my kids. Is that so wrong?" "You're a liar." Sarah's voice rang out clear and strong. Everyone turned. Sarah Cole stood at the school entrance, backpack slung over one shoulder, Tommy and Sam flanking her like small soldiers. Her face was set in lines too hard for a 7-year-old. "Sarah, sweetheart," Caleb started, "you're not my sweetheart, and you haven't changed. You're the same mean drunk you always were." Sarah's voice shook but didn't break. "You hurt Mama. You hurt us. And I'm not going back to you, ever." The crowd's murmur shifted. Parents looked at Caleb with new suspicion, then at Sarah with dawning understanding. Caleb's mask slipped, rage flashing across his features. "You little brat! You don't talk to your father like that." "You're not my father. Fathers protect their kids. You just hurt us." Ethan moved then, stepping forward to put himself between Caleb and the children. "You need to leave. Now. This is a public sidewalk. I have every right, and she has every right to collect her children from school without being harassed. The restraining order hearing is in 2 days. Until then, you stay away." "Or what? You'll throw money at the problem? Buy off a judge?" Caleb's smile was ugly. "I know how this works, Mercer. Rich guys like you think you're untouchable. But the law's on my side. Those are my kids, and I'm taking them back." Sheriff Morrison chose that moment to arrive, presumably called by the school. He assessed the situation quickly, then turned to Caleb. "Mr. Ross, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. I'm not doing anything illegal. You're creating a disturbance on school property. I can cite you for that, or you can leave voluntarily. Your choice." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Morrison's expression must have convinced him it wasn't worth it. He gathered his sign and flyers, but not before turning to deliver one last shot. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Hannah. Because come Thursday, a judge is going to see through your lies, and then those kids are coming home with me." He left, and the crowd slowly dispersed, though Ethan could feel their stares, hear their whispered speculation. The damage was done. Caleb had planted seeds of doubt in a community that barely knew Hannah, and those seeds would grow. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Ethan found her sitting on the porch steps long after bedtime, staring out at the dark fields. "Hey, kiddo, you okay?" She shrugged, small shoulders hunched. "Is he really going to take us away?" Ethan sat beside her, choosing his words carefully. "He's going to try, but we're going to do everything we can to stop him." "What if you can't? What if the judge makes us go back?" "Then we appeal. And if that doesn't work, we keep fighting. We don't give up." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I meant what I said today. About him not being my father. A real dad wouldn't scare his kids." "You're right. He wouldn't." "Are you going to be our dad?" The question hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. "I don't know, Sarah. That's complicated." "Why? You live with us. You take care of us. You make Mama smile." She looked up at him with those two old eyes. "Seems pretty simple to me." "Your mom and I aren't married. So get married. If only it were that easy. It's not about marriage, kiddo. It's about what your mom wants, what you kids need. I can't just decide to be your dad. That's something we'd all have to choose together." "I choose you," Sarah said quietly. "I don't know about Mama or the boys, but I choose you." Ethan pulled her into a hug and she melted against him, still so small despite her fierce bravery. That means more than you know. The custody hearing arrived cold and gray, the November sky promising snow. Jim met them at the courthouse steps, briefcase in hand and expression serious. Remember what we practiced. Answer the questions directly. Don't get defensive. Don't let his lawyer provoke you. He looked at Hannah. And most importantly, tell the truth. The judge will see through lies, but he'll also see through manipulation if we present it right. The courtroom was smaller than Ethan expected, wood-paneled and formal. Judge Catherine Martinez presided, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no apparent patience for nonsense. Caleb sat at the opposite table with his lawyer, cleaned up and sober, playing the role of concerned father. It was sickening how convincing he looked. Hannah's testimony came first. Jim led her through the history, the marriage, the abuse, the moment she decided to leave. She spoke clearly, without drama, reciting facts like a grocery list. But her hands shook when she described the night Caleb had grabbed Sarah, and Ethan saw Judge Martinez make a note. Then came cross-examination, and Caleb's lawyer went for the throat. Mrs. Ross, you claim my client was abusive, yet you never filed a police report. Why is that? I was scared, and I didn't think they'd believe me. Or perhaps there was nothing to report. Perhaps you're fabricating these allegations to justify your decision to leave. No, it happened. You say you were concerned for your children's safety, yet you took them to live in a condemned cabin with no running water or heat. Does that sound like the decision of a concerned mother? Hannah's jaw clenched. I did the best I could with what I had. And now you're living with Mr. Mercer, a man you barely knew 2 months ago. How did that arrangement come about? He offered me work I accepted. Work that conveniently includes room and board for you and 4 children? That's quite generous. What exactly are you doing to earn such generosity? Jim was on his feet. Objection. The question is inappropriate and irrelevant. I'll rephrase, Caleb's lawyer said smoothly. Mrs. Ross, is it not true that you're in a romantic relationship with Mr. Mercer? Hannah's face flushed. That's none of your business. It's very much our business when you're asking this court to keep a father from his children while living in what amounts to an unmarried partnership. What kind of moral example does that set? Objection, Jim's voice was sharp. Counsel is testifying instead of questioning. Judge Martinez held up a hand. Sustained. Mr. Brennan, ask your questions without the editorial comments. And Mrs. Ross, please answer yes or no. Are you in a romantic relationship with Ethan Mercer? Hannah looked at Ethan across the courtroom, and in that moment, he saw her making a choice. Tell the truth and give Caleb ammunition, or lie and compromise her credibility. She chose truth. Yes, we're involved. The murmur that went through the courtroom was immediate. Caleb's lawyer smiled like he'd won the lottery. So you left your husband, took his children, and immediately began a relationship with another man. And you expect this court to believe your motivation was protecting your children, not pursuing your own interests? I left because Caleb was hurting us. What happened after that is separate. Is it? Or did you see an opportunity, a rich rancher who could provide the life you wanted, and seize it using your children as leverage? That's not what happened. Then explain to the court how, within weeks of starting employment with Mr. Mercer, you and your children had moved into his home. Explain how that's not opportunistic. Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. He offered us safety when we had none. He gave my children food when they were hungry. He treated us with kindness when all we'd known was cruelty. I didn't seduce him or manipulate him. I accepted help from someone who actually cared whether we lived or died. The raw honesty of it seemed to catch even Caleb's lawyer off guard. He recovered quickly, but the momentum had shifted slightly. Ethan's testimony came next. He explained the employment arrangement, the way Hannah had worked, the condition he'd found the Peterson cabin in when he'd followed her. He described Caleb's threatening phone call, the scene at the school. Mr. Mercer, Caleb's lawyer said during cross-examination, you're a wealthy man. You could hire any number of housekeepers or staff. Why did you specifically help Mrs. Ross? Because she needed help, and I had the means to provide it. That's very noble. But isn't it true that you were attracted to her from the beginning? I respected her work ethic, her dedication to her children. That's not what I asked. Were you attracted to her? Ethan glanced at the judge, then decided honesty was his only option. Eventually, yes, but that's not why I helped her. Are you sure about that? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you saw a vulnerable woman with 4 children and decided she'd make a nice addition to your ranch. A ready-made family for a lonely millionaire. That's offensive and wrong. Is it? You've known my client's wife for 2 months, and already you're playing house, inserting yourself into these children's lives, encouraging them to call you. What was it that Sarah said at school? A real dad. You don't see anything wrong with that? I see a woman who is being abused and children who are suffering. I see a man who abandoned his family and now wants them back only to maintain control. And I see my role as making sure Hannah and those kids have the support they need to be safe. How noble. Tell me, Mr. Mercer, if the court awards custody to my client, will you accept that decision? Or will you continue this campaign to separate a father from his children? The question was a trap, and Ethan knew it, but he answered anyway. I'll accept whatever the court decides is in the best interests of those children. But I'll also do everything in my power to make sure the court has all the facts before making that decision. The proceeding continued for 3 more hours. Witnesses testified. Miguel about Caleb's threatening behavior at the ranch, Martha about Hannah's work ethic and character, the school principal about Sarah's incident. Caleb took the stand and played his part perfectly, the reformed sinner desperate for a second chance. I've made mistakes, he said, voice thick with practiced emotion. I drank too much, let my temper get the better of me, but I've been sober 6 months now. I've got a job lined up in Montana. I found a house big enough for all of us. All I want is a chance to be the father my kids deserve. Mr. Ross, Jim said during cross-examination, you say you've been sober 6 months, but weren't you visibly intoxicated when you showed up at Mr. Mercer's ranch 3 weeks ago? Caleb's mask slipped for just a second. I'd had a couple drinks. I was upset. A couple drinks? Or were you drunk and threatening violence with a tire iron? I was emotional. My kids had been taken from me. They weren't taken. Their mother left to protect them. From you. Jim pulled out a document. Mr. Ross, is it true you have a bench warrant out for your arrest in Montana for failure to pay child support? That's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that's led to a warrant? How much do you owe, Mr. Ross? Caleb shifted in his seat. I don't know the exact amount. According to these records, you owe $17,000 in back child support. You haven't made a single payment in over a year. Does that sound like a father who cares about supporting his children? I was between jobs. You couldn't pay $17 a week, the minimum amount ordered by the court? Jim's voice was sharp. Or were you just choosing not to because you were angry Hannah left? I have rights as a father. Rights that come with responsibilities. Responsibilities you've ignored. Jim returned to his table. No further questions. Judge Martinez called a 30-minute recess before final arguments. Ethan found Hannah in the hallway, pale and shaking. I ruined it, she whispered, admitting we're together. That's all they're going to remember. You told the truth. That matters. Does it? Or did I just hand Caleb exactly what he needed to take my kids? Before Ethan could answer, Caleb appeared at the end of the hallway. He ditched his lawyer, approaching with that same false concern he'd worn at the school. Hannah, can we talk? Just the 2 of us? Stay away from me. I just want to work this out, for the kids. He moved closer and Ethan stepped between them. This doesn't concern you, Mercer. Everything that concerns Hannah concerns me. Right, because you're so invested after 2 months. Caleb's smile was ugly. You think you know her? You don't know anything. Don't know what she's really like when what? Ethan's voice dropped to something dangerous. When she's being beaten, terrorized, made to believe she's worthless? Yeah, I know exactly what she's like. She's strong, brave, a better parent than you'll ever be. Caleb's composure cracked. You self-righteous son of a... Mr. Ross, Jim appeared with the bailiff. If you want any chance in there, you'll walk away right now. Caleb glared at Ethan for a long moment, then spun on his heel and stalked back toward the courtroom. Final arguments were brutal. Caleb's lawyer painted Hannah as an opportunist who'd used her children to secure a wealthy benefactor. Jim painted Caleb as an abuser who wanted his children back only to maintain control and avoid child support obligations. Then it was over. Judge Martinez promised a decision within 48 hours and dismissed them. The waiting was agony. Hannah barely slept, spending the nights pacing Ethan's living room or sitting with the children while they slept, as if memorizing their faces in case this was the last chance she'd get. The call came on a gray Thursday afternoon. Jim's voice was carefully neutral. Judge Martinez has her decision. We need to be at the courthouse in an hour. They gathered in that same courtroom, Ethan holding Hannah's hand as Judge Martinez took the bench. The older woman looked at both parties with an expression that revealed nothing. I've reviewed all the testimony and evidence in this case. I've considered the best interests of the children involved, and I've reached a decision. Hannah's hand tightened in Ethan's, her breathing shallow. Mr. Ross, you claim to want what's best for your children, but your actions suggest otherwise. You failed to provide financial support. You have a documented history of violence and substance abuse. And most tellingly, you've made no effort to contact your children in over a year until Mrs. Ross filed for divorce. Caleb stood frozen, his lawyer's hand on his arm. Mrs. Ross, while I have concerns about the speed with which you've entered a new relationship, I cannot ignore the evidence that you've consistently prioritized your children's welfare. You've established them in school, obtained medical care, provided stability in the face of significant adversity. Judge Martinez looked directly at Hannah. I'm granting you sole legal and physical custody of Sarah, Thomas, Samuel, and Lily Ross. Mr. Ross will be granted supervised visitation 1 weekend per month, contingent on completion of anger management courses, substance abuse treatment, and payment of child support arrears. The words took a moment to register. Then Hannah gasped, a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. Ethan pulled her against him as she shook with relief. Across the courtroom, Caleb exploded. This is bullshit. You can't. Those are my kids. You can't just give them to her because she's sleeping with some rich asshole. Mr. Ross, Judge Martinez's voice cracked like a whip. You will control yourself or I will hold you in contempt. I don't give a damn about contempt. This is corrupt. She's bought you off, just like she bought him. Caleb pointed at Ethan, face purple with rage. I'll appeal this. I'll fight it. You'll do nothing, the judge said coldly. Because if you continue this behavior, I'll revoke visitation entirely and issue a permanent restraining order. Do you understand me? Caleb looked like he wanted to flip the table, but his lawyer was whispering urgently in his ear. Finally, he turned and stormed out, slamming the courtroom door hard enough to rattle the frame. Judge Martinez turned back to Hannah. Mrs. Ross, I'm also granting your request for a protection order. Mr. Ross is to maintain a distance of 500 feet from you and the children except during supervised visitation. Violations will result in immediate arrest. Thank you, Hannah whispered. Thank you so much. Outside the courthouse, Hannah finally let herself break. She cried in Ethan's arms while Jim packed up his briefcase and promised to file all the necessary paperwork. It's over, she kept saying. It's really over. Not quite, Jim warned. He can still appeal, and he probably will. Let him, Ethan said. We'll beat him again, as many times as it takes. They drove home through the gathering dusk, Hannah finally breathing freely for the first time in what felt like years. But that freedom was short-lived. They were a mile from the ranch when they saw the smoke, black and thick, rising from somewhere near the main house. Ethan's foot slammed on the accelerator, truck flying down the ranch road. As they got closer, the truth became horrifyingly clear. The old Peterson cabin was burning, and spray-painted across Ethan's barn in jagged red letters was a message. This isn't over. Ethan's hands locked on the steering wheel as flames licked at what remained of the Peterson cabin, consuming the last physical evidence of Hannah's struggle for survival. The fire department was already there, 3 trucks with hoses trained on the blaze, but everyone could see it was too late to save anything. The structure had been barely standing to begin with. Now it was being reduced to ash and memory. He did this, well, Hannah said, voice hollow. He burned it down. We don't know that for sure, Ethan said, but the words rang false even to his own ears. The timing was too perfect, the message on the barn too clear. Miguel ran up to the truck before they'd fully stopped. "Boss, everyone's okay. No one was hurt. But whoever did this knew exactly when we'd all be at the courthouse. They came in through the back road, torched the cabin, tagged the barn, and disappeared." "Security cameras?" "Cut the power to that section first. We've got nothing." Ethan looked at Hannah, saw her face crumbling as she stared at the burning cabin. Everything she'd owned beyond what she'd brought to his house was in there. Not much, but it had been hers. The last remnant of her independence going up in smoke. "Take Hannah and the kids inside," Ethan told Miguel. "Lock the doors. I need to talk to the fire chief." "Ethan," Hannah started, "please, just go inside. I'll handle this." She went, gathering the children who'd been strapped in the back seat, shielding their eyes from the flames as Miguel escorted them toward the house. Ethan watched until they were safely through the door, then turned to survey the damage. Fire Chief Douglas was a man Ethan had known for 20 years, someone who didn't mince words or waste time on pleasantries. He met Ethan halfway between the trucks and the burning cabin, his expression grim. "This was arson, Ethan. Accelerant poured around the perimeter, multiple ignition points. Professional enough to ensure maximum damage, amateur enough to leave evidence." "Can you prove it was Caleb Ross?" "Not yet. But given the message on your barn and the timing right after a custody hearing, I'd bet my pension on it." Douglas pulled off his helmet. "Problem is, proving he did it and catching him doing it are two different things. If he's smart, he's already 3 states away. And if he's not smart, then he'll come back to finish what he started. Men like that don't walk away from losing, especially when they feel humiliated." Douglas put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Watch your back. Watch Hannah and those kids. This kind of rage doesn't just burn out." Sheriff Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, taking statements and photographs. He examined the spray-painted message on the barn, the tire tracks on the back road, the burn pattern around the cabin's foundation. "I'm issuing a warrant for Caleb Ross," Morrison said. "Arson, criminal mischief, violation of the protection order. That's enough to hold him when we find him." "When you find him, or if?" Ethan couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "I've got every department in 3 states looking for his truck. He can't hide forever." Morrison closed his notebook. "In the meantime, I'm stationing a deputy here. 24-hour protection until we bring him in." It should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like admitting they were under siege. Inside the house, Hannah had gathered the children in the living room. Sarah held Lily on her lap, while Tommy and Sam pressed against their mother's sides. None of them were crying. They'd gone quiet instead. The kind of quiet that came from shock and fear too big for tears. "Is our old house gone?" Sam asked in a small voice. Hannah stroked his hair. "Yes, baby, it's gone." "Did we do something wrong?" No, sweetheart. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." Sarah looked up at Ethan with those knowing eyes. "It was him, wasn't it? Our father." Ethan crouched down to her level, meeting her gaze directly. "We think so, but the sheriff's looking for him. He won't get away with this." "He always gets away with things." Sarah's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "That's what he does. He hurts people and then disappears before anyone can stop him." "Not this time," Ethan promised. "This time we've got evidence, witnesses, the law on our side. This time he's going to face consequences." But Sarah just looked at him with an expression far too old for 7, and Ethan realized she'd heard promises before. She'd learned not to believe them. That night, no one slept well. Ethan heard footsteps in the hallway around 2 a.m. and found Hannah in his kitchen, staring out the window into the darkness. "I keep thinking about what he said," she whispered when Ethan joined her, "that this isn't over. He meant it." "I know. He's not going to stop. The custody order, the restraining order, none of it matters to him. He'll keep coming until he gets what he wants, or until someone stops him permanently." Ethan poured them both coffee, though neither of them drank it. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Run, hide, spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder?" She laughed, a broken sound. "I'm so tired of being scared, Ethan. So tired of letting him control my life, even from a distance." "Then we don't run. We stay. We fight. And if fighting isn't enough, then we fight harder." Hannah turned to face him fully, and in the dim kitchen light she looked both fragile and fierce. "Why are you doing this? Really? You could walk away right now. Tell me and the kids to leave, that you can't handle the danger we've brought to your home. No one would blame you. I would blame me. That's not an answer. Ethan took a breath, knowing he was about to cross a line they'd been dancing around for weeks. Because somewhere between watching you work yourself to the bone and seeing you with those kids, I fell in love with you. With all of you. And I don't walk away from people I love. Hannah's breath caught. Ethan, I'm not asking for anything, not asking you to feel the same way or to make any promises. I just need you to know that this isn't charity or obligation. This is me choosing to stand beside you because I can't imagine doing anything else. She stared at him for a long moment, tears tracking down her cheeks. Then she closed the distance between them and kissed him, not tentative like before, but fierce and certain. I love you too, she whispered against his mouth. I've been trying not to because it seemed impossible, but I do. I love you. They stood there in the quiet kitchen holding each other while the deputy's patrol car circled the property and the ashes of Hannah's old life cooled in the darkness. Caleb's truck was found 3 days later, abandoned at a rest stop in Wyoming. He'd stripped it of plates and anything identifying, but forensics found accelerant residue in the bed and Hannah's address written on a scrap of paper in the glove box. He's on foot now, Morrison reported, or he's stolen another vehicle. Either way, he's desperate and dangerous. You think he'll come back here? I think it's the only place he has left to go. He's lost the custody battle, lost his truck, probably running out of money. Men like that, when they're cornered, they do desperate things. Ethan increased security again. More cameras, more patrols, a panic button installed in Hannah's room that would alert both the deputy and Ethan's phone. He taught Hannah how to use the shotgun again, made sure she kept it loaded and accessible. The kids picked up on the tension. They stopped playing as loudly, started checking the windows more often, asking if the doors were locked. Sarah appointed herself the guardian of her siblings, keeping them close and watching everything with hawk-like intensity. It broke Ethan's heart to see children living in fear in what should have been a safe place. He bought them walkie-talkies, told them it was a game, but made sure they knew to use them if they saw anything strange. He installed nightlights in every hallway, left lights on that normally would have been dark. He turned his home into a fortress, and he hated Caleb Ross for making it necessary. A week passed, then 2. The fire chief closed his investigation, ruling the cabin fire as arson, but unable to definitively prove Caleb was responsible without a confession or witness. The insurance company paid out, though there was nothing to insure beyond the land. Life tried to return to normal. The kids went to school under watchful eyes. Hannah worked, though now her work included helping Ethan manage the ranch books and planning actual business dinners with actual clients who were charmed by her cooking and warmth. They fell into rhythms that felt almost like a family, moments where they could almost forget they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Almost. The attack came on a Tuesday night in early December. Ethan woke to the sound of breaking glass and the piercing shriek of the alarm system. He grabbed his phone and the pistol he'd started keeping in his nightstand, already moving toward Hannah's room. She met him in the hallway, shotgun in hand, face pale but determined. The kids, "Stay with them, lock the door. I'll handle this." But before he could move, Sarah appeared, walkie-talkie clutched in her hand. "He's trying to get in through the kitchen window. I saw him from my room." "Good girl, go with your mom. Now." Ethan moved through the house with his heart pounding, following the sound of cursing and breaking glass toward the kitchen. He found Caleb halfway through the window, drunk or high or both, bleeding from cuts where the glass had sliced his arms. "Get out of my house," Ethan said, voice deadly calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Caleb looked up, eyes wild and unfocused. "Your house? This is all wrong. They're supposed to be mine. She's supposed to be mine." "Hannah's not yours, never was. She's her own person, and she chose to leave you." "Because of you." Caleb managed to drag himself through the window, stumbling to his feet. He had a knife, Ethan realized, a hunting knife with a 6-inch blade. "You took everything from me. My wife, my kids, my life. You did that yourself when you started hitting her. I never meant to hurt her. I loved her." "Love her." Caleb swayed, barely staying upright. "Just wanted her to listen, to obey. That's what wives do. What the Bible says." "The Bible doesn't say anything about beating your wife." You don't know anything about marriage, about family. You're just some rich bastard playing house." Caleb lunged, knife slashing wildly. Ethan sidestepped, years of ranch work giving him reflexes Caleb's drunken state couldn't match. But the knife caught his arm, a burning line of pain that he ignored in favor of grabbing Caleb's wrist. They struggled, crashing into the kitchen table. Caleb was smaller, but fueled by rage and desperation, fighting with the reckless abandon of someone with nothing left to lose. Ethan tried to control the knife, to disarm him without killing him, but Caleb wasn't making it easy. "I'll kill you," Caleb panted. "Kill you and take them back. They're mine. Mine!" The gun went off before Ethan fully processed what was happening. Not his gun. The shotgun. Hannah stood in the kitchen doorway, weapon still raised, face white with shock. The blast had gone wide, deliberately so, but it had been close enough to make Caleb freeze. "Get away from him," she said, voice shaking but steady. "Get away from him, or the next one won't miss." Caleb turned to her, something crumbling in his expression. "Hannah, baby, I just wanted to talk. Just wanted to make you understand." "Understand what? That you'd rather kill us than lose control?" Hannah's eyes were hard. "I understand perfectly, Caleb. I understand you're never going to change. Never going to be the man I needed you to be. I can change. I have changed. If you just give me another chance. I gave you 100 chances. Every time you hit me, I told myself it would be the last time. That you'd realize what you were doing and stop. But you never did." She lowered the gun slightly, but kept it trained on him. "I'm done giving you chances. Done being afraid. Done letting you determine what my life looks like." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The deputy must have been alerted by the alarm. Help was coming. Caleb seemed to realize it too, his face twisted into something ugly and desperate. "Then you've killed me. Because without you, without them, I've got nothing. That's not my problem anymore." The sirens got louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Caleb looked between Hannah and Ethan, calculation playing across his features. Then he lunged, not at Ethan this time, but toward the hallway where the children were. Hannah fired. This time she didn't miss. The blast caught Caleb in the leg, sending him sprawling with a scream of pain. The knife clattered across the floor. Ethan kicked it away, then planted his knee in Caleb's back, pinning him down while the man writhed and cursed. Deputies poured through the door seconds later, taking control of the situation. They arrested Caleb on the floor of Ethan's kitchen while paramedics tended to his leg wound and Ethan's slashed arm. Morrison arrived and took statements, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage. "That's breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, violation of the restraining order," Morrison said. "He's looking at serious prison time, Ethan. This isn't a custody dispute anymore. This is attempted murder." Hannah sat at the kitchen table, shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. The children clustered around her, Sarah still clutching the walkie-talkie, the boys crying softly, Lily sleeping somehow through all of it. "Is it over?" Hannah asked quietly. "Really over this time?" Morrison looked at Caleb being loaded into the ambulance, shackled and screaming threats that no one was listening to anymore. "Yeah, this time it's over." The trial happened fast by legal standards, though every day of waiting felt like an eternity. Caleb's public defender tried to argue temporary insanity, emotional distress, anything that might reduce the charges. But the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage showing him breaking in, the knife with his fingerprints, Hannah's testimony about years of abuse, Sarah's statement about what she'd witnessed as a child. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Martinez sentenced him to 15 years, no possibility of parole for at least 10. His parental rights were terminated permanently. He'd file appeals from prison, they all knew that, but he'd lost. Completely and utterly lost. Hannah cried when they read the verdict, but this time they were tears of relief. Winter settled over the ranch like a blanket, snow covering the burned remnants of the Peterson cabin and turning everything clean and white. Christmas approached, and for the first time in years, Hannah let herself think about celebrating. Ethan went overboard, of course, a tree that touched the ceiling in his living room, lights strung across every surface, presents that multiplied under the tree daily, until Hannah had to tell him to stop because the kids were getting spoiled. "Let me spoil them," he'd argued. "They deserve to be spoiled." She couldn't really disagree. On Christmas morning, the house exploded in wrapping paper and squeals of delight. Sarah got books, so many books her eyes went wide with joy. Tommy got art supplies and sports equipment. Sam got a keyboard to continue the piano lessons he'd started. Lily got toys that she immediately tried to eat. Hannah opened her gifts with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of each one. Warm clothes that actually fit. Books she'd mentioned wanting. A new driver's license in her name, showing Ethan's ranch as her permanent address. And then Ethan handed her a small box, wrapped simply, that made her heart stop. "Before you panic," he said quietly, while the kids were distracted with their toys, "this isn't what you think it is. Open it." Inside was a key, old brass, worn smooth with age. "It's the key to the main house," Ethan explained. "Your house now, if you want it. Not as my employee or my girlfriend or anything with conditions, just as someone who belongs here. You and the kids, for as long as you want to stay." Hannah stared at the key, at this man who'd somehow become her whole world, and felt something in her chest unlock. "And what if I want to stay forever? Then I guess I'll have to get used to having a full house. What if I want more than just a full house?" She reached up, cupping his face. "What if I want a partnership, a real one?" Ethan's smile was slow and certain. "Then I guess I'd better make an honest woman of you, hadn't I?" Sarah looked up from her books. "Are you going to get married?" "Would that be okay with you?" Hannah asked. Sarah pretended to consider it seriously. "I suppose, as long as Ethan keeps making pancakes on Saturdays." "That's my only value? Pancakes? And you do homework help," Tommy added. "And you let us play with the barn cats," Sam chimed in. "And you make Mama smile," Sarah finished, her own smile bright and genuine. "That's the most important part." Ethan looked at Hannah, saw his whole future reflected in her eyes, and pulled her close. "Then I guess I'd better keep doing all those things." They got married in the spring, a small ceremony in Ethan's living room with Judge Martinez officiating and the kids as witnesses. Hannah wore a simple white dress that she'd picked out herself, no one telling her what was appropriate or modest enough. Ethan wore his best suit and couldn't stop grinning like an idiot. Sarah was the maid of honor, taking her duties seriously as she held the rings. Tommy and Sam were ring bearers who mostly just wrestled with each other until it was time for their part. Lily toddled between them, spreading flower petals and chaos in equal measure. When Judge Martinez pronounced them husband and wife, the kids cheered louder than anyone. Life on the ranch settled into a new normal, one built on choice and respect, and a love that had been forged in fire and fear and emerged stronger. Hannah took over the ranch's business operations, revealing a talent for organization and management that Ethan had always suspected. She hired help, built systems, turned his moderately successful operation into something truly profitable. The kids thrived. Sarah lost some of that haunted watchfulness, though she never quite stopped being protective of her siblings. Tommy discovered a love for ranching, following Miguel around and learning everything about cattle and horses. Sam composed songs on his keyboard that sometimes made Hannah cry. Lily grew into a force of nature, fearless and loud, and so loved it radiated from her like sunshine. Ethan adopted all four of them formally, legal papers that made official what had already been true in their hearts. They changed their last names to Mercer, shedding the Ross identity like a skin that no longer fit. On the anniversary of the fire, Ethan and Hannah stood where the Peterson cabin had been. The land had been cleared, grass growing over the scars. He'd offered to build something new there, but Hannah had shaken her head. "Let it be empty," she'd said, "a reminder of what we survived, what we left behind." But she'd planted wildflowers around the perimeter, native species that would bloom every spring, life reclaiming what destruction had tried to take. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked as they stood in the field of flowers. "Leaving your old life? Fighting so hard for this one?" Hannah looked back at the house where their children were doing homework and arguing over whose turn it was to feed the cats. Where laughter spilled from open windows and the smell of dinner cooking promised another normal evening in a life that had once seemed impossible. "Not for a single second," she said, taking his hand. "This is what I was fighting for all along. I just didn't know it until I found you." "You didn't find me." I found you. No. Hannah smiled, the kind of smile that lit her whole face and made Ethan's heart skip. We found each other, and then we chose each other, every single day. And that, Ethan thought as he pulled her close and watched the sun set over land that had become their shared kingdom, was the real story. Not about rescue or saving, but about two people who'd been broken by life finding a way to build something whole together. About a woman who'd started as a hired hand and became the heart of a home. About 4 kids who'd learned that family wasn't just about blood, but about the people who showed up and stayed. About a millionaire rancher who'd discovered that the greatest wealth wasn't in his bank account, but in the morning chaos of breakfast, the evening ritual of bedtime stories, and the quiet moments with a woman who'd chosen to trust him with her heart. Years later, when people asked how they'd gotten together, Ethan would smile and say he'd hired her to clean his cabin. Hannah would add that he'd followed her home and found 4 kids. Then they'd look at each other with the kind of understanding that only comes from walking through fire together, and one of the kids would roll their eyes and tell the real story. The one about a mother who'd fought for her children with everything she had, about a man who'd learned that sometimes the best investment was in people, not property. About a family that had been forged not in perfection, but in choosing each other despite the imperfections. About love that was earned, not given. Built, not found. Chosen, every single day. And they all lived not happily ever after because life was never that simple. But they lived fully, messily, beautifully together. They lived with purpose and passion and the kind of fierce loyalty that comes from knowing exactly what you could lose and choosing to protect it anyway. They lived free from the shadows of the past, present in each moment, building a future that belonged to all of them. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world.